Did you know there were 2 Fallout games before the 3rd Fallout game? It's true! Fallout was actually intended to be Wasteland 2 before the IP rights fell through and the project had to become Fallout, not Wasteland. 25 years have come and gone since then, and Wasteland's popularity has been shadowed by its spin-off, but that hasn't stopped Brian Fargo from keeping the dream alive. He acquired the Wasteland rights in 2003, but was never able to begin work on a sequel until 2012, when the Wasteland 2 Kickstarter was funded. That may make this game the first real litmus test of whether or not 2012's Kickstarter boom of nostalgic game projects is going to work. $3 million of fan funding, 2.5 years of dev time, and a $40 price tag are making this happen. So that's why I've spent 75 hours since launch to tell you that after all this time and drama, Wasteland 2 is a grower, not a shower. It's one of the most compelling and immersive RPGs I've played in years, but it didn't really feel like that until after the 20-hour mark. I don't know if that's a good thing. Much like its predecessors, it's a massive game that rewards long-term investment. It's as ambitious as it is buggy. It's dense on detail, sparse on spectacle, and very generous with the word count. And more than anything else, it is very, very slow. It's easy to forget just how slow-paced old-school CRPGs like this actually were, but once I caught myself spending half an hour just on character creation, memories of spending weeks on Fallout came back to me. The combat grid is made of squares rather than hexes, the locational damage screen is now just one headshot button, and placeable bombs and landmines are gone. The one appreciated addition to the combat is the ambush button, which executes your planned moves during the enemy's turn. While a perfectly planned ambush is always satisfying, the combat here is a bit less complex than maybe it needed to be. Just grab cover, focus your fire on the highest DPS dealer, and work your way down. But it is still the closest thing to Fallout 2 I've played since Fallout 2. If you cursed the cancellation of Van Buren, if you think Fallout 3 is garbage and New Vegas is a glitchy FPS, then this is your game. It was made for you and not many other people. But it's also a reminder of the compromises a truly niche title has to make. It's a reminder that Fallout still had to compete for retail shelf space in the general market, which gave it a budget and a layer of polish that Wasteland 2 does not have. But it's fun to notice some of the old school quirks that just would not have happened if the game went through a big publisher. If you're afraid of accidentally making useless gimpy characters, this is not your game. Here's a tip: invest in intelligence and medicine, specialize your party members, and name them accordingly. You're welcome. Being like a classic doesn't necessarily make Wasteland 2 a classic. I'm worried that, just like its predecessor, it may not ultimately be remembered as one of the greats. For starters, the tight Kickstarter budget is evident as soon as you start a new game. These graphics don't look demanding, but a few maps really struggled to maintain 30 frames per second on my computer. There are also reused assets everywhere. The same character models, portraits, sound effects, icons, textures, models, and sometimes entire maps show up again and again, merely pretending to be different. One problem I never expected to have was how disorienting a controllable 3D isometric camera can be, especially when there are so many reused assets everywhere. Without a mini-map and without any kind of marker showing what you're looking at on the big map, it was common to swing my view into a camera angle I hadn't seen before and just get lost. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old. There's also a lot of choices for fonts and icons that don't exactly shine with big budget polish. For example, these door icons. It was a few hours before I noticed them because their colors blended into the background so well. By now you've probably noticed that comparisons to Fallout are inevitable, but one thing I never expected to miss was that retro-futuristic 50s theme. Wasteland's aesthetic style is literally a lot more dry and dusty, with less room for gaudy social commentary while still trying to fit that humor in at the same time. The writing quality is there, but the world building feels unimaginative. Some environments look like they were cobbled together from the post-apocalypse aisle of the Unity store, before later areas gradually become much more interesting to look at. Also, in accordance with CRPG tradition, bugs happen. Occasionally, this psychedelic effect locked up my screen. This button prompt didn't want to go away for a while, and what was strangely comforting was seeing a few quests begin and end improperly because I had stumbled across their triggers out of the intended order. Just keep in mind that this game is meant to be played for around 80 hours, and with that much content to go through, those tech problems really are small fries. The big concern, though, that would be much harder to fix is this game's painfully slow pace. Your squad of desert rangers are basically Wasteland police. It's a simple setup for a game to introduce weeks of unstructured open-world wasteland adventures into your life, with lots of quest lines that work over the good cop, bad cop dichotomy. So it's kind of strange that the first few hours of gameplay funnel you through very gated sections of the overworld map into a couple of dungeon crawls that have you clearing out caves of zombies for hours. Maybe even 14 hours if you believe this guy. I mean, having played it, I might believe it. I cannot stress enough how long it takes for this game to wake up and show some spark of creativity and energy or some kind of edge. That's a harsh comparison to even Wasteland 1, which had you brawl into crazy bar fights and track down supernatural blood cults and murder gangs of homicidal children within the first couple hours. I've always thought that the most interesting parts of an RPG are what goes on in towns outside of the dungeons, and Wasteland 2 doesn't have a whole lot of town action until that second half. Not a lot of bustling, lively, friendly areas full of side quests really start cropping up until long after you begin. I don't want to spoil exactly what happens, but the overall game really does feel like it was split up between two different writers into two different halves. Pass through the first half and suddenly a lot of bizarre factions with interesting internal conflicts show up everywhere. Eventually it feels like every town you discover is crowded with side quests and world-building details, with hilarious writing rife with choices and consequences that feel like they could play out any which way. Maybe the game was just growing on me, but I still think that first half had a lot less creative energy put into it. You'll notice when that transition happens. It is hard to miss. But for me, that didn't happen until about 30 hours in. And with a number that high, I don't think it's excusable. It means stuff had to be cut out. I was having the time of my life after that point for the next 45 hours, enough to make me want to go through it again and again, just to see how many different long-term decisions I could have made, but I'm really not looking forward to going through those early dungeons again. The biggest problem with Wasteland 2, though, what permeates both halves of this game, is an archaic, hotkey-based interface that feels stuck further in the past than it should. Say you want to open a locked and a trapped chest. You need to click on your character with the highest perception, then click on the ground next to the chest to perception check it, then click on your demolitions expert, then click on the demolition skill, then click on the chest, then click on your lockpicking expert, then click on the lockpicking skill, then click on the chest, and then you can finally distribute the loot between your party members' inventories one character at a time. It's a slow process, but it does highlight the generous amount of options you have for interacting with nearly every interactable object in the game. After all, if you don't have the keys or the lockpicking skill to open a closed door, you can always just blow it up. But here's an idea. Why couldn't we have had a mouse menu that presents all of these options in one click instead of 7? Hell, even Fallout had a rudimentary right mouse menu back in 1996. I have to wonder how many of those 74 hours were spent just opening up loot containers. I really do. It sounds like a petty complaint, but all that time clicking through the process really adds up. So does the procedure of lining up your party for combat. There's nothing to speed that up. There's no way to save formations, reorganize your party order, or split them into specialized groups. There's no way to order AI followers, or fast forward through turn animations, or speed up overworld travel times or even smaller world travel times. If you need to move from one side of a map to another, just walk away from the computer and make a sandwich or something. Do some chores, because just walking around takes a while. Random combat encounters that you can't avoid can potentially eat up 20 extra minutes of your life, depending on how long you think about the math behind your moves. The default difficulty throws waves of bullet-spongy enemies at you to keep you thrifty for its bullet-bartering economy. The Wasteland feels as tough and unforgiving as its characters say it is. You have a shared experience with the characters in the fiction, and few other games can really match that feeling. That's what the old Fallouts did well, and it works in this game too. Maybe even better since the difficulty curve isn't as lopsided here. Every little decision you make weighs heavy consequences. Every decision demands time for consideration, which makes the time-consuming interface that much more unfortunate. The later game, though, is so much more interesting, not just because the writing gets better and you may get used to the interface by then, but because you can finally see the long-term effects of your deliberate decisions and your mistakes. There's permadeath, your party members die permanently, but there's also lots of NPC party members wandering around out there who want to fill those empty spots. So it's built to accommodate permanent one-save runs. It's probably a far more interesting game if you actually roleplay, but it's time-eating purgatory if you play it like a completionist. If you save scum around every risky skill check and search every nook and cranny of every map, it will undoubtedly feel like there's more quantity than quality here. So I suggest you roll with the punches and take the hits, that you resist the temptation to quick save all the time and just deal with the compromises you'll have to make. After all, this is homaging the olden days where video games were designed with tabletop rules. It's built to make stories for your characters, for multiple playthroughs of characters, rather than tell a story for a player who will uncover all the content their first time around. Wasteland 2 starts slow. It starts really slow, but it grows into something that eventually does feel like a gloriously revived interplay-made Fallout 3, complete with all the bizarre themed factions, the twisty labyrinth of choices and consequences, the tough economics, the never-ending content and replayability, and those surreal moments of self-referential humor and unexplained desert discoveries that I've always wanted out of a game like this. You just have to give it a lot of time and a lot of patience, but it will give back in spades. At the end of the day, I recommend it. That $40 will buy you weeks of reliable gaming, something to come to and come back to for the next couple months that will undoubtedly leave an impression once it's all over and done with. It will take a while to pick up and get going, but it is worth it once it does.